The first sign of trouble arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, carried by a man in a crisp, white polo shirt embroidered with the logo of the Crestview Lakes Management Company. Simone Givens was on her knees in the memorial garden, her hands deep in the cool soil, gently teasing out a stubborn strand of bindweed from the base of a white rosebush. The scent of damp earth and lavender was a balm, a familiar comfort in the 2 years since her husband, David, had passed. This garden, a small, vibrant square of life in her backyard, was his final design, and her ongoing project. It was less a hobby and more a conversation with a ghost. "Ma'am Simone Givens." The voice was polite but firm, cutting through the suburban quiet. Simone looked up, shielding her eyes from the autumn sun. The man stood just at the edge of her lawn, where the manicured fescue met the flagstone path to her back patio. He held a clipboard like a shield. "I'm Simone," she said, rising and brushing the dirt from her knees. "Markham." He introduced himself, not offering a first name. "I'm an inspector with the management company, just doing my quarterly rounds." His eyes weren't on her. They were fixed on the garden, specifically on the trio of Italian cypress trees she and David had planted to frame the space. They were slender, elegant, and, according to the notice that would soon arrive, a grave offense. "Everything in order?" Simone asked, her tone neutral. She was accustomed to the HOA's presence. They were a constant, silent hum in Crestview Lakes, measuring lawn height, checking for oil stains on driveways, ensuring all mailbox flags were uniformly black. It was the price of admission to this placid world of curving streets and identical oak trees. "Mostly," Markham said, making a note on his clipboard. "I'm afraid we have an issue with this structure." He gestured vaguely at the garden. Simone's posture straightened. "It's a garden, not a structure." "Right. Well, the plantings, specifically the cypresses, appear to be obstructing the view corridor easement as designated on the community master plan." He delivered the line with the practiced ease of someone who had crushed many homeowner dreams with procedural jargon. A cold knot formed in Simone's stomach. "The what?" "The view corridor," he repeated, tapping his pen on the clipboard. "It's to ensure that properties maintain an open and aesthetically pleasing sightline from the common areas. Your cypresses are in direct violation." Simone glanced behind her. The common area in question was a narrow strip of grass that ran behind the backyards of her cul-de-sac, containing a paved walking path and, 50 yards away, a small, unremarkable retention pond. The notion that her slender trees were obstructing a vital view of a glorified drainage ditch was absurd. "Mr. Markham," she began, keeping her voice even, "this garden is entirely within my property line. I have the survey from when we bought the house. There is no easement running through my backyard." He offered a tight, sympathetic in name-only smile. "I understand it can be confusing. The HOA's governing documents supersede individual surveys in matters pertaining to community-wide aesthetic standards. You'll receive a courtesy notice in the mail with the details. It will explain the remediation process." The word remediation hung in the air. He meant she had to tear it down. Tear out the cypresses David had chosen, the ones that were meant to represent a quiet, enduring strength. As he spoke, Simone became aware of movement at the periphery. Mrs. Henderson from next door was peering through her kitchen window. Across the street, Mr. Gable had paused his leaf blowing, the machine idling at his side as he watched the exchange. This wasn't just a notice. It was a public shaming, a subtle demonstration of the board's power. You are being watched. You are being judged. "There must be a mistake," Simone said, her voice a little tighter now. "I'd be happy to show you my property deed and the survey map." "That won't be necessary," Markham said, already turning to leave. The notice will have all the information you need, including the citation for the specific CC&R clause. Have a nice day. He walked away, his white polo a retreating beacon of bureaucratic authority. Simone stood frozen, the warmth of the sun suddenly gone. The smell of lavender now seemed cloying, the soil on her hands a gritty reminder of her powerlessness. The conversation with her husband was over for the day, replaced by the cold, impersonal voice of the homeowners association. And she had the distinct feeling that this was not a courtesy notice, but a declaration of war. The house felt cavernously quiet that evening. Simone sat at the heavy oak dining table David had built, a single plate of untouched salmon and asparagus before her. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. For the first year after he was gone, the silence had been an antagonist, a physical presence she fought with the television, music, podcasts, anything to fill the void. Over the past year, however, she had made a fragile peace with it. The garden was instrumental in that truce. It was a place where silence felt productive, full of the quiet industry of roots growing and petals unfurling. Now, the silence felt hostile again, pregnant with the threat of Markham's words. Simone Givens was a woman who dealt in facts, in numbers that either added up or they didn't. As a forensic accountant, her job was to follow the paper trail, to find the narrative hidden in spreadsheets and invoices. She unraveled complex shells of deception for a living, tracing embezzled funds and identifying fraudulent reporting. It was a profession that suited her methodical, patient mind. She believed in rules, in systems, in the logical progression of evidence leading to a conclusion. It was this belief in systems that had, ironically, made Crestview Lakes appealing. After a career spent in the chaotic gray areas of financial crime, the subdivision's black and white rulebook seemed restful. She and David had bought the corner lot 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of community, safety, and the kind of orderly existence where the biggest worry was whether your holiday decorations were taken down by January 15th. David, a landscape architect with a poet's soul, had seen the blank canvas of the backyard and envisioned a sanctuary. Not just a bunch of flowers, Sim, he'd told her, sketching on a notepad at this very table. A story. Each plant has a meaning. The white roses were for remembrance, the lavender for peace, the sturdy boxwood hedges for permanence, and the 3 Italian cypresses, standing like sentinels at the back, were for hope, for reaching upward. The garden was his last gift, a living blueprint of his love. After his sudden heart attack, finishing it became Simone's anchor. Every weed pulled, every bush pruned, was an act of devotion. It was the one place where her grief could be transformed into something beautiful. The antagonist in this looming narrative, she already knew, was Karen Miller. Karen was the 5-term president of the Crestview Lakes HOA board, a woman for whom the term aesthetic uniformity was a religious creed. She lived 3 houses down, in a pristine colonial with unnaturally green grass and shutters painted a shade of beige, so specific it had its own line item in the CC&R's covenants. Conditions and restrictions. Karen drove a white SUV, wore expensive athletic wear, even when not exercising, and wielded her authority with the unblinking certainty of a zealot. Her power was absolute because, for years, no one had bothered to challenge it. Most residents, like Simone, had simply chosen to comply for the sake of peace. Simone's only direct interaction with Karen had been a year ago. She'd affixed a small, tasteful yellow ribbon to her mailbox in support of a neighbor's deployed son. 2 days later, a crisp email from Karen informed her that paragraph 12.7.3 of the community bylaws prohibited any non-standard adornments on mailboxes. The email ended with a condescendingly cheerful, "Let's all do our part to keep Crestview Lakes beautiful." Simone had removed the ribbon. It wasn't a battle worth fighting. But the garden was different. The garden was not a ribbon. It was a piece of David's soul, and a part of hers. The courtesy notice arrived 2 days later. Just as Markham had promised, it was a single sheet of paper, delivered via email from the management company. Subject: Courtesy Notice, CCNR violation, at 1282 Willow Creek Lane. Dear Ms. Givens, this email serves as a courtesy notice following a routine inspection of your property on October 5th. It was observed that plantings within your rear yard are in violation of the Crestview Lakes CCNRs. Specifically, the violation pertains to 8.4.2, obstruction of designated view corridors. The Italian cypress trees located at the rear of your property line encroach upon the protected view corridor extending from the common area walking path. Please remediate this issue by removing the infringing plantings within 14 days of this notice. Failure to comply may result in a formal violation notice and the imposition of fines. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining the aesthetic standards that make Crestview Lakes a premier community. Sincerely, the Crestview Lakes Architectural Control Committee. Simone read the email 3 times. The language was sterile, impersonal, designed to convey unassailable authority. She highlighted the clause, paragraph 8.4.2. Then, she opened the 200-page PDF of the community CCNRs she had saved to her desktop when she first moved in. She searched the document. There it was. Paragraph 8.4.2. Obstruction of designated view corridors. No fence, hedge, wall, or other structure shall be erected or maintained upon any part of a lot in such a manner as to obstruct the view from adjacent lots or common areas as designated on the recorded plat map. The key phrase, her analytical mind immediately noted, was as designated on the recorded plat map. She pulled up the HOA's public website and navigated to the Community Info tab. There was a map, a beautifully rendered watercolor illustration of Crestview Lakes showing the curving streets and little green patches of common area. It was artistic, charming, and utterly devoid of any legal boundary lines, easements, or official designations. It was a marketing tool, not a plat map. A slow burn of anger began to replace her anxiety. They were citing a rule based on a non-existent designation on a map that was, for all practical purposes, a cartoon. This wasn't about a rule. This was about power. And it was being wielded by Karen Miller. Simone minimized the window and began typing a reply. She kept it polite, factual, and firm. She explained that the garden was on her private property, cited her own deed, which showed no such easement, and respectfully requested a copy of the official, recorded plat map that designated this view corridor. She hit send, the click of the mouse echoing in the silent house. The system she had once found comforting was now being weaponized against her. But Simone was an expert in deconstructing systems. She would follow the paper trail. She would find the facts. And she would defend David's garden. For a week, the only response was silence. The digital void that followed her polite but firm email was, Simone knew, a tactic in itself. It was designed to make her anxious, to make her wonder if she had overstepped, to let the 14-day remediation deadline tick closer. She tended to the garden as usual, but a shadow of uncertainty hung over her. Every time she looked at the cypresses, she felt a pang of anticipatory loss. Then, on the 8th day, the escalation arrived. It didn't come as an email. It came via certified mail, requiring a signature. The green and white slip in her mailbox felt like a summons. Simone signed for the envelope with a steady hand, thanking the mail carrier before closing her front door. The return address was the Crestview Lakes Management Company. Inside, the tone was no longer courteous. Formal notice of violation. Date, October 19th. Property, 1282. Willow Creek Lane. Owner, Simone Givens. Tracking, Jeter, V. 2023. 10-19-482. Dear Ms. Givens, this letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the Crestview Lakes CC&Rs. As previously communicated in our courtesy notice dated October 11th, your property remains in violation of FIRA 8.4.2, obstruction of designated view corridors. Your unapproved plantings 3 Italian cypress trees continue to obstruct the protected view corridor. Your email of October 11th has been reviewed by the Architectural Control Committee ACC, and your reasoning was found to be insufficient to waive the violation. In accordance with the association's enforcement policy, a fine of $50 has been assessed to your account. This fine is due within 30 days. Furthermore, an additional fine of $25 per week will be levied for each week the violation remains uncorrected. You are hereby instructed to remove the infringing plantings by October 31st. Failure to do so will result in further fines and may lead to the association seeking injunctive relief at the owner's expense. You have the right to appeal this decision by requesting a hearing with the ACC. Your request for a hearing must be submitted in writing within 10 days of the date of this notice. Sincerely, the Crestview Lakes Board of Directors. The paper felt cold in her hands. This was it. The polite suggestion had morphed into a formal challenge, complete with a file number, a financial penalty, and the veiled threat of legal action. The phrase insufficient to waive the violation was a masterpiece of bureaucratic dismissal. They hadn't addressed her request for the plat map or her evidence about her property lines. They had simply ignored it. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of aggression. Simone walked to her home office, the letter held tight in her grip. Her forensic accounting instincts kicked in. This was an audit of power. She created a new folder on her computer, naming it Show a Dispute. She scanned the letter and saved it as a PDF. She created a spreadsheet to track dates, correspondence, and deadlines. October 5th, verbal warning from inspector. October 11th, courtesy notice via email. October 11th, my response, requesting plat map. October 19th, formal violation notice via certified mail, $50 fine. Deadline to appeal, Oct. 29. Deadline to remediate, Oct. 31. The timelines were tight, designed to overwhelm and pressure a quick surrender. Pay the small fine, cut down the trees, and make the problem go away. She was certain 99% of residents would do just that. But Simone was the 1%. Her first call was not to a lawyer. It was to a land surveyor. She found a local, well-regarded firm and spoke to a man named Arthur Evans. She explained the situation calmly and precisely. They're claiming a view corridor easement that isn't on my deed, and they're refusing to provide the plat map that supposedly designates it. She concluded. There was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Givens. Mr. Evans said, his voice a gravelly baritone. I've been surveying in this county for 30 years. View corridor easement is a term HOAs love to throw around. But unless it is explicitly recorded on the final subdivision, plat filed with the county, or on your property deed, it's legally unenforceable. It's air. They're trying to enforce air. That's what I suspected, Simone said, a sliver of validation cutting through her anger. Would you be able to come out and formally mark my property lines? I want an official, legally binding survey report. Absolutely, he replied. How's Friday morning? Her second step was to formally request the appeal hearing. She drafted a letter, again keeping it professional and to the point. She cited the violation notice number and formally requested a hearing with the Architectural Control Committee to present her evidence. She sent it via email, with a delivery and read receipt, and also sent a physical copy via certified mail, creating her own paper trail. She would play their game, but she would play it with better evidence. As she sealed the envelope, she looked out the window at the garden. The cypresses stood tall against the darkening sky. The fight had been formalized. The line had been drawn, not by an imaginary corridor, but by the crisp, undeniable edges of a certified mail receipt. This wasn't just about trees anymore. It was about her home, her rights, and her refusal to be bullied by a committee that believed its power was absolute. The Architectural Control Committee meeting was held in what the community called the clubhouse, a generous term for a small, windowless room in the back of the pool building. It smelled faintly of chlorine and stale coffee. Simone arrived 5 minutes early, clutching a file folder containing her property deed, the original survey from her home purchase, and a printed copy of her correspondence with the management company. 3 people sat at a folding table at the front of the room. In the center was Karen Miller, looking crisp and authoritative in a navy blue blazer. To her right sat Gerald, a retiree who nodded agreeably at everything Karen said. To her left was a younger woman named Brenda, who seemed intensely focused on organizing a stack of papers, avoiding eye contact with anyone. There were only 2 other homeowners in attendance, an elderly couple there to get approval for a new storm door. Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her pen on the table. First on the agenda is the appeal for the storm door at 1412 Summerfield Court. All in favor approved. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Gable. She dispatched them with a thin, efficient smile. Next, the appeal of violation, V 2023-10-19-482 property at 1282 Willow Creek Lane. Owner, Simone Givens. Her eyes met Simone's across the small room. There was no warmth in them, only a cool, appraising look. Mrs. Givens, you have the floor, Karen said, her tone suggesting it was a temporary loan. Thank you, Simone began, standing and opening her folder. I am appealing this violation on the grounds that it is factually incorrect. The violation cites an obstruction of a view corridor easement. However, as you can see from my official property deed and the survey conducted when I purchased the home, there is no such easement recorded on my lot. She stepped forward to hand the documents to the committee. Karen held up a hand, stopping her. That won't be necessary. Ms. Givens, Karen said smoothly, the committee is already in possession of the community's governing documents, which are the prevailing authority here. Simone paused, taken aback. The prevailing authority would be the legally recorded plat map, which I requested a copy of and have yet to receive. CC&R Fargo 8.4.2 is only enforceable if such a corridor is designated on that specific map. Can you provide it? Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. The board interprets the master plan as a whole. The intent of the founders was to preserve the natural aesthetic of the community. The committee has determined that your plantings impede that aesthetic, in contravention of the spirit of the rule. The spirit of the rule. The phrase was a giant red flag. In Simone's world, numbers didn't have a spirit. They were either correct or incorrect. With all due respect, Mrs. Miller, Simone countered, keeping her voice steady. Fines and liens can't be based on the spirit of a rule. They must be based on the letter of the rule. The letter of FER 8.4.2 hinges on a designation that appears to be non-existent. If you can't produce the map, you can't enforce the violation. Brenda shifted uncomfortably. Gerald just looked at Karen, waiting for his cue. Karen leaned forward, her voice taking on a patronizing edge. Like a teacher explaining a simple concept to a child. As you'll see if you read the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased your home, the ACC has broad authority to regulate aesthetic matters. We are empowered to make these judgments on behalf of the entire community, to protect our collective property values. It's a heavy responsibility, but one we take very seriously. She was stonewalling, drowning the facts in a sea of procedural jargon and appeals to a greater good. Simone felt a surge of frustration, but she refused to let it show. "So you are declining to provide the plat map?" Simone asked, her question sharp and direct. "The committee has made its determination," Karen said, effectively ending the discussion. She glanced at the other two. A motion to deny the appeal and uphold the violation and fines is on the floor. All in favor. Gerald's hand shot up. Brenda's rose slowly, her eyes still on her papers. "The motion carries," Karen declared. "Your appeal is denied. Ms. Givens, you will be expected to remediate the violation by the October 31st deadline. Thank you for your time. This meeting is adjourned." She tapped her pen again. It was over. The entire hearing had lasted less than 5 minutes. Simone stood there, her folder of evidence rendered useless. She hadn't been heard. She had been managed. The purpose of the meeting wasn't to review her appeal, but to publicly ratify a decision that had already been made. It was a piece of theater designed to give the illusion of due process. As she walked out of the clubhouse into the bright sunlight, the sting of humiliation was sharp and unexpected. Karen hadn't just dismissed her facts. She had condescended to her, treated her like a nuisance in a public forum, however small. The conflict was no longer just procedural. It was now deeply personal. And Karen Miller had just made a grave miscalculation. She had underestimated her opponent. Simone wasn't just a homeowner anymore. She was a forensic accountant with a case to build. The next morning, Arthur Evans, the surveyor, arrived precisely at 8:00 a.m. He was a tall, stoic man, with sun-weathered skin and a no-nonsense demeanor. He worked with quiet efficiency, setting up his theodolite and driving temporary iron stakes into the ground at the precise corners of Simone's lot. An hour later, he rolled up his blueprints and handed her a preliminary report. "Just as we suspected," he said, pointing to a crisp line on the drawing. "Your property line extends a full 10 feet beyond that walking path. The path itself is in the common area, but your garden, including those cypresses, is 100% on your private lot. There is absolutely no recorded easement for a view corridor or anything else in your backyard. It's clean." He tapped the paper. "This is legally binding. What they're doing is a classic case of HOA overreach. Happens all the time." He paused, looking from the report to Simone's determined face. "I've seen these fights get ugly. Ma'am, they'll try to wear you down with letters and fines. Most people give up." "I'm not most people," Simone said, a new resolve hardening in her voice. The surveyor's report was her foundation, the first solid piece of irrefutable evidence in her case file. Her next stop was the Collin County Recorder's Office, a sterile, beige building that smelled of old paper and bureaucratic indifference. Armed with her property's legal description, she requested the official, recorded subdivision plat map for Crestview Lakes. Section 3. The clerk, a woman who looked as though she had been part of the building's original fixtures, returned a few minutes later with a large, rolled-up document. Simone carefully unrolled it on a wide table. It was a world away from the watercolor painting on the HOA website. This was a blueprint of her world. A web of precise black lines, lot numbers, and legal notations. She found her lot. 1282 Willow Creek Lane. She traced its boundaries. She saw the common area behind it clearly marked. Her eyes scanned the entire document, every note, every legend, every designated space. There was no mention of a view corridor easement. Not on her lot, not on her neighbors' lots, not anywhere in the entire section. The one thing Karen Miller's entire case rested on did not exist. It was a fiction. Simone took a photo of the map with her phone, then paid for a certified, full-sized copy. As she walked out of the county building, the heavy cardboard tube in her hand felt like a weapon. That evening, she sought out a different kind of expert. Eleanor Vance, her next-door neighbor, was a retired corporate lawyer in her late 70s who had lived in Crestview Lakes since it was built. Simone found her on her front porch, reading a novel. "Eleanor, can I ask you something about the HOA?" Simone began. Eleanor put down her book, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "Let me guess. You've run afoul of Empress Karen." Simone managed a small smile. "You could say that. She's trying to force me to tear out my late husband's garden over a non-existent rule." Simone quickly summarized the situation: the inspector, the notices, the sham ACC meeting, and her findings from the surveyor and the county recorder. Eleanor listened intently, nodding slowly. "I'm not surprised," Eleanor said when Simone had finished. "Karen's been running this board like her own personal fiefdom for a decade. She gets away with it because she wraps everything in the flag of protecting property values. It's a powerful scare tactic. People are terrified of losing their investment, so they don't question her." "But this is different," Simone said. "This isn't a judgment call about paint colors. This is fabricated. She's citing a rule she has to know doesn't exist." Eleanor leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Then there's a reason, Simone. A reason beyond aesthetics. Karen Miller doesn't do anything without a motive that benefits her. A few years ago, she pushed through a landscaping enhancement on the common area by the front entrance. The cost was astronomical. A few of us raised questions, but she shut us down, citing board privilege. Later, I found out the contract went to a company owned by her brother-in-law. She's not just a stickler for rules, she's an opportunist." Eleanor's words hung in the air. "There's a reason." The warning resonated with Simone's own instincts. A forensic audit never stops at the first discrepancy. It follows the money. It looks for the motive. Why this garden? Why now? Why invent a violation that was so easily disproven? "Be careful, dear," Eleanor concluded, her voice soft but serious. "You have the facts on your side, but Karen has the power of the office. She's vindictive when challenged. Don't just fight the violation. Find out why she created it in the first place." Back in her office, Simone felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting. This was bigger than 3 cypress trees. Eleanor's story about the landscaping contract sparked an idea. She logged into the Crestview Lakes resident portal. It was a clunky, outdated website, but it had an archive of official documents, including board meeting minutes. She started scrolling through the minutes from the past 6 months, her eyes scanning for keywords: landscape, common area, view, easement, for hours. She found nothing but tedious discussions about pool maintenance and holiday decorations. Then, in the minutes from a meeting in August, she found it. Agenda. Item 6. Landscape enhancements. Common area Section 3. Discussion held regarding potential improvements to the common area behind Willow Creek Lane. A motion was made to explore options for increasing the aesthetic appeal and marketability of the adjacent undeveloped parcel. The discussion that followed is subject to attorney-client privilege and has been redacted. Following that entry was a solid black rectangle. Redacted. Her heart began to beat a little faster. Another black rectangle appeared in the September minutes. Under the same agenda item, attorney-client privilege, in her line of work. That phrase was often used to hide something far more strategic than legal advice. They weren't just improving the common area. They were trying to increase the marketability of the adjacent, undeveloped parcel. Simone pulled up the county property map on her computer. The parcel in question was a large, vacant lot directly behind her and her neighbors' homes. It was owned by a corporation. A quick search of the corporation's name led her to its parent company, Viridian Development, a major commercial and residential builder in the region. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap in her mind. This wasn't about Karen's obsession with aesthetics. This was about a land deal. A developer wanted to buy that adjacent lot, and a clear, unobstructed view from that lot, across the common area and through her yard, was part of the negotiation. Her garden wasn't violating a rule. It was standing in the way of someone's profit. And Karen Miller was the HOA's enforcer. The redacted minutes were a locked door. Simone knew the key was a formal records request. Under state property code, homeowners have the right to inspect the books and records of their association, while attorney-client privilege was a legitimate reason for redaction. Its application here to a discussion about landscape enhancements seemed dubious. It was a shield, and she intended to get behind it. She drafted a formal request, citing the specific state statute, and emailed it to the management company, CCing the general email address for the board of directors. She requested the complete, unredacted minutes from the August and September board meetings pertaining to the common area in Section 3. The law gave them 10 business days to comply. The clock was now ticking on their secrecy. While she waited, the pressure mounted. On November 2nd, a new letter arrived. Notice of Board Hearing. Dear Ms. Givens, please be advised that the Board of Directors will hold a hearing on November 9th at 7:00 p.m. at the Community Clubhouse regarding the continuing violation at your property. The purpose of this hearing is to provide you with an opportunity to be heard before the board votes on ratifying all assessed fines and authorizing the association's legal counsel to file a lien against your property for non-compliance. You will be allotted 5 minutes to present your case. The letter was a tactical masterpiece of intimidation. A public hearing, the threat of a lien, a legal claim against her property title, the most serious weapon in an HOA's arsenal, and a 5-minute time limit to defend her home. They were trying to force her into a corner, to make a public example of her before she could assemble her case. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to find a foothold, but she pushed it back with methodical preparation. She spent the next few days building her evidentiary binder. The first section contained the surveyor's report and the certified plat map, clear proof the garden was on her private property and that no easement existed. The second section contained the violation notices and her correspondence, showing their refusal to provide evidence. The third section was currently empty, awaiting the unredacted minutes. On the 8th business day, just 2 days before the scheduled hearing, a PDF arrived in her inbox from the management company. The subject line was curt, "Records Request Fulfillment." Simone's hands were trembling slightly as she opened the file. The minutes were no longer redacted. The black boxes were gone, replaced by text. Her eyes flew across the page. August, meeting minutes. Unredacted discussion held regarding a preliminary offer from Viridian Development for the purchase of the adjacent lot. Their offer is contingent on several factors, including a guaranteed unobstructed view corridor across the Section 3 common area. Viridian has indicated this view is critical for the premium pricing of the units they plan to build. President Miller noted the board should take all necessary steps to secure this condition, as a high-end development next door would significantly increase our community's property values. President Miller will act as the sole liaison with Viridian's representatives to streamline negotiations. September. Meeting minutes. Unredacted. President Miller provided an update on the Viridian negotiations. Viridian has offered a community benefit contribution of $50,000 to the association upon closing, contingent on the view corridor being cleared of all obstructions, including plantings on adjacent private lots by December 1st. A motion was passed to authorize President Miller to continue negotiations. Simone leaned back, a low whistle escaping her lips. It was all there, in black and white. The view corridor was a fabrication, a pretext manufactured to satisfy a developer's demand. The lie wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about money, a $50,000 contribution to the HOA. But her forensic accountant's gut told her the story didn't end there. Why would Karen Miller go to such lengths risking legal exposure by enforcing a non-existent rule for a general community fund? The motivation felt personal. President Miller will act as the sole liaison. That line was the key. Sole liaison meant no oversight. It meant she controlled the flow of information. Simone's mind started racing. She opened a new browser tab and began to dig into Karen Miller. Public record searches yielded the usual property records, voter registration. Then she searched for Karen's husband, Robert Miller. He was listed as the managing partner of a small consulting firm, Miller and Associates Consulting, LLC. On a hunch, she cross-referenced Viridian Development's recent political contributions and vendor filings with the city. It took 2 hours of scrolling through dense, public databases. But then she found it, a payment record from Viridian to a subcontractor for community outreach consulting on a different project. The subcontractor's name was North Texas Strategic Solutions, LLC. It felt like a dead end, until she plugged that LLC name into the state's corporate records database. She paid the $7 fee to pull the official registration documents. The registered agent and sole owner of North Texas Strategic Solutions, LLC, was Robert Miller. The address listed for the LLC was Karen and Robert's home address. Simone felt a chill run down her spine. The money wasn't just the $50,000 contribution to the HOA. Viridian was paying Karen's husband's shell company, likely for consulting on how to get the HOA to clear the view corridor. The payments were almost certainly kickbacks, funneled through her husband's company to keep her name off the books. Karen wasn't just enforcing a fake rule for the community's benefit. She was doing it for her own personal, secret profit. She printed the LLC registration and the payment record from Viridian. This was the smoking gun, the motive, the core of the entire fraud. Her evidentiary binder was now complete. She had just 72 hours to prepare for the hearing that could determine the fate of her home. With the hearing looming, Simone felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The anxiety of the unknown had been replaced by the clarity of her evidence. She spent the next day organizing her presentation, timing herself, ensuring she could deliver the key facts within the 5-minute window. She planned to present it methodically, logically, just like she would in a financial audit review. On the eve of the hearing, she decided to speak with Mr. Henderson. He was an elderly widower who lived on the main boulevard, one of the original homeowners in Crestview Lakes. He was universally respected, a quiet man who had served on the very first board of directors decades ago. He was the community's moral compass. She found him tending his prize-winning roses. She explained the entire situation, laying out her evidence from the plat map to the unredacted minutes to the Shell LLC. He listened patiently, his weathered face thoughtful. when she finished. He didn't offer congratulations or outrage. Instead, he looked past her, toward the quiet, tree-lined street. "You've done good work, Simone," he said, his voice raspy with age. "You've found the rot. But I want you to think about what happens the moment you expose it." Simone frowned. "What do you mean?" "The truth comes out. Karen is removed. The lien is dropped." "That's part of it." "Yes," he said, turning to meet her eyes. "But think bigger. The moment you mention Viridian development in a public meeting, the deal is dead. They won't touch a community embroiled in a corruption scandal. The story will hit the local news. Suburban HOA president in kickback scheme. Our community's name will be dragged through the mud." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "My neighbor across the street, the Wilsons, are trying to sell their house. Their retirement depends on it. The family on the corner just listed theirs because of a job transfer. A public scandal, even a temporary one. We'll tank property values here for at least a year. Buyers will run for the hills. You'll win your battle over the garden. But the fallout could hurt a lot of good. Innocent people. It could cost your neighbors tens of thousands of dollars." It was a dimension she hadn't fully considered. She had been so focused on the singular injustice against her that she hadn't calculated the collateral damage of her victory. It was a secondary moral dilemma, a classic ethical trap. Do you expose a corrupt system if the act of exposure harms the very people the system is supposed to serve? "So, what do you suggest I do?" Simone asked, the confidence in her plan now shaken. "Let her get away with it." "I'm not saying that," Mr. Henderson said gently. "I'm just asking you to consider the way you do it. Is there a way to stop Karen? To remove her from power? Without burning the whole village down in the process? You have powerful evidence. How you choose to present it, what you choose to emphasize, will determine the outcome not just for you, but for all of us." He turned back to his roses, leaving Simone to grapple with the new, heavy weight of his question. She had prepared for a battle of facts, a clear-cut case of right versus wrong. But Mr. Henderson had introduced a complication. It wasn't just about being right. It was about being wise. Her 5-minute presentation now had to accomplish two goals: save her garden and save her neighborhood from the fallout of the truth. She walked home, her binder feeling heavier than before. She had less than 24 hours to find a new strategy. The clubhouse was packed. Every folding chair was filled, and residents stood 3 deep along the back wall. Word of the hearing about the garden lady had spread through the neighborhood, fueled by gossip and the quiet circulation of Simone's story, by Eleanor and a few others. The air was thick with anticipation. At the front table sat Karen Miller, flanked by the entire 5-person board. A large projector screen was set up behind them, currently displaying the Crestview Lakes logo. To the side, a digital timer was set to 5:00. Karen banged a small gavel. "This special hearing of the board is now in session. The sole agenda item is the continued rules violation at 1282 Willow Creek Lane. The purpose is to allow the homeowner, Ms. Simone Givens, to speak before the board votes to ratify fines and authorize a lien. Ms. Givens, you have 5 minutes." All eyes turned to Simone as she walked to the small lectern facing the board. She placed her binder on it and inserted a USB drive into the provided laptop. Her heart was a steady, rhythmic drum against her ribs. She was nervous, but she was prepared. She took a deep breath and began, her voice calm and clear, addressing not just the board, but the entire room. "Good evening. My name is Simone Givens. The board claims I am in violation of CC&R Fargo 8.4.2 for obstructing a view corridor. I am here to present evidence that this claim is not only false, but was manufactured for reasons that have nothing to do with our community's bylaws. The timer started 4:59, 4:58. First, let's establish the facts of the property itself. On the screen, behind the board, the Crestview Lakes watercolor map appeared for a second, then dissolved into the crisp, black and white image of the surveyor's report. A red arrow pointed to her garden. This is a certified survey of my lot. As you can see, the garden is located entirely on my private property. The image changed to the official county plat map, and this is the recorded plat map for our subdivision. There is no view corridor easement designated anywhere on or near my property. The legal basis for this violation does not exist. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's face was a mask of strained composure. Second, let's look at the rule itself. The text of CC&Rs, Paragraph 8.4.2, appeared on the screen. Simone read it aloud, her voice even, in such a manner as to obstruct the view from adjacent lots or common areas as designated on the recorded plat map. She let the final phrase hang in the air. The board has been unable to produce that designation because it isn't there. This begs the question, why invent a violation? She clicked to the next slide. It showed the redacted minutes from the August board meeting. The answer, it turns out, is in the board's own records. This is a copy of the minutes I, as a homeowner, found on the HOA portal. Large sections were blacked out under attorney-client privilege, but the law gives us the right to the truth. She clicked again. The unredacted version appeared side by side with the redacted one. The damning sentences were highlighted in yellow. The unredacted minutes reveal secret negotiations with a company called Viridian Development. They want to buy the lot behind our homes, but their offer was contingent on a guaranteed unobstructed view corridor, a corridor that required clearing plantings on adjacent private lots. My garden. Gasps echoed through the room. Board members shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at Karen, who sat rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped her pen. Now came the delicate part addressing Mr. Henderson's dilemma. Now, I want to be clear, Simone said, her tone shifting from prosecutorial to collaborative. Pursuing opportunities that could raise our property values is something a board should do. But the problem isn't the goal, it's the method. When a board operates in secret, when it knowingly enforces a non-existent rule against a resident to satisfy a developer's demand, it breaks the trust we place in it. That lack of transparency is a far greater long-term threat to our property values than any single land deal. She had framed it as a governance issue, not an attack on the deal itself, protecting her innocent neighbors from immediate financial panic. And this leads to the most important question. Why such secrecy? Why go to such lengths? She clicked to her final slide. On the screen appeared two documents, the state registration for North Texas Strategic Solutions, LLC, showing Robert Miller as the owner, and a bank transfer record showing a $15,000 payment from Viridian Development to that LLC for consulting services. These records show that while the board was secretly negotiating a deal that required violating my property rights, its president's husband was accepting payments from the very same developer through a shell company. This was never about a garden. It was never about a view. It was about personal profit, concealed by procedural abuse and lies. The timer flashed red. Silence. Absolute. Stunned silence gripped the room for a full 10 seconds. Then, the explosion. The room erupted in a cacophony of angry, overlapping voices. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions at the board table. Karen Miller sat as if turned to stone, her face pale, the mask of control utterly shattered. The other board members looked horrified, clearly blindsided by the revelation of the kickbacks. The narrative was no longer hers to control. It belonged to the community now. The first person to break through the chaos with a clear voice was the representative from the Crestview Lakes Management Company, a nervous-looking man who had been sitting quietly in the front row. He stood up, holding his hands out, as if to quell a fire. "On behalf of the management company," he announced, his voice straining to be heard over the din, "I want to state for the record that we were not privy to any external financial arrangements made by board members. We simply act on the board's directives. Given this new information, we advise the board to immediately and indefinitely table all matters related to the violation at 1282 Willow Creek Lane." He was backpedaling so fast he was nearly tripping over his own words, creating as much distance as possible between his company and the imploding board. Next, Eleanor Vance rose, her voice, though aged, cutting through the room with the practiced authority of a retired lawyer. "I'd like to make a motion from the floor," she called out. The shouting subsided as people turned to listen. "I move for an immediate, independent forensic audit of this association's finances for the last 5 years. And I further move for a vote of no confidence in our current board president, Karen Miller." "Second," boomed Mr. Henderson from his seat near the front. Karen finally moved. She banged her gavel weakly. "This is out of order. Motions from the floor are not on the agenda." But she had lost the room. No one was listening to her rules anymore. "All in favor of the audit and the vote of no confidence," Eleanor shouted. A forest of hands shot up across the room. It was nearly unanimous. The other board members, seeing the tide turn so decisively, began whispering among themselves. One of them, a man who had remained silent through the entire hearing, cleared his throat. "I believe," he said, pointedly, not looking at Karen, "that, in light of the evidence presented, it would be in the best interest of the community for the entire board to tender its resignation, effective immediately, and to schedule an emergency election for a new board." A wave of applause swept the room. It was over. Karen Miller's reign had ended not with a whimper, but with a public detonation of facts. She stared out at the crowd, her expression one of utter disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how her carefully constructed world had been dismantled in 5 minutes. She slowly gathered her papers, stood up, and walked out of the clubhouse without another word, the residents parting to let her pass, their silence a more damning verdict than any shout could have been. Simone watched her go, feeling not a sense of triumph, but of profound, weary relief. She had defended the garden. She had exposed the truth. And, by following Mr. Henderson's advice, she had done so in a way that empowered the community rather than panicked it. The call for an audit and a new election was constructive, a path forward. The village was not burning down. It was preparing to rebuild on a stronger foundation. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with conversation, resident after resident stopped by the lectern to thank her, to shake her hand, to share their own small stories of feeling bullied by the board. She was no longer the garden lady or the rule breaker. She was the woman who had given them their voice back. In the weeks that followed, Crestview Lakes underwent a quiet revolution. A special election was held, and an entirely new board was voted in, running on a platform of radical transparency. Eleanor Vance, despite her protests that she was long past her committee days, was overwhelmingly elected the new president. One of the first items on the agenda was a formal, public apology to Simone Givens, and the permanent dismissal of the violation notice. Simone was asked to lead a newly formed transparency committee, tasked with rewriting parts of the bylaws to ensure accountability and to make all financial records and meeting minutes easily accessible to residents online. She accepted, seeing it as her duty to help build the system she wished had existed when her ordeal began. The forensic audit confirmed everything Simone had uncovered, and more, revealing a pattern of cronyism and financial mismanagement stretching back years. The findings were turned over to the local authorities, and the Miller family's legal troubles were only just beginning. The Viridian development deal, now tainted by scandal, was officially and permanently voided by the new board. There was a collective sigh of relief throughout the neighborhood. No one, it turned out, had been particularly excited about a massive construction project looming over their backyards. Months passed. Spring arrived, and with it, new life. The garden, now safe, thrived. The white roses bloomed in profusion. The lavender sent its calming scent across the lawn, and the 3 Italian cypresses stood taller and prouder than ever. One Saturday morning, as Simone was weeding near the back of the garden, Eleanor approached her from the common area walking path. "We have some good news," Eleanor said, a warm smile on her face. The audit managed to claw back a significant portion of the funds Karen and her husband diverted over the years. About $75,000, all told. "That's wonderful news," Simone said, genuinely pleased for the community. "It is," Eleanor agreed, "and the new board has decided what to do with it. We're establishing a permanent community beautification fund. Its purpose is to invest that money back into our shared spaces, to make this place better for everyone." She paused, her smile widening. "And our first project has just been approved." She gestured to the strip of common area behind Simone's property, the very space the fictional view corridor was meant to protect. "We're going to install a perennial border along this entire stretch of the walking path. Something beautiful that will bloom all season long. We're starting right here." Simone looked at the plain strip of grass and imagined it filled with color cone flowers, black-eyed Susans, and Russian sage, a project born from recovered kickback funds, designed to enhance the beauty of the neighborhood, starting at the very place that had been the source of so much conflict. The irony was not lost on her. The final surprise was a perfect, poetic piece of justice. The scheme that began with an attempt to destroy her garden for a manufactured view would end with the creation of a real one, for everyone to enjoy. Her private sanctuary, her conversation with David, would now be framed by a gesture of public beauty and renewal. She stood there, watching as the first survey flags for the new flower beds were placed in the ground, a light breeze rustling the leaves of the cypress trees. The fight was over. The silence in her home was peaceful once more. The garden was safe, and the community, scarred but stronger, was beginning to bloom again.